This channel is focused on multiplayer sim gameplay, and with that ground truth, this interview orientates around that. I sat down with Ironmike from Heatblur, and we dove deep on the module maker's perspective when it comes to selecting and releasing modules in DCS, and how they think about multiplayer, and even multiplayer-specific servers as they work on their projects. This interview is quite a long one, but I think new and old players will find it interesting, as we really covered a wide range of topics while still coming back to Kolovar and the multiplayer question. Let me know what you think about what was discussed in the comments below, and please do remember to hit the like and subscribe button, as this really helps a small niche channel like myself. Lastly, I think this may be the last module maker interview for a while, unless I can get ED to hop on, but no promises. I hope you enjoy. So Mike, thanks for being willing to hop on. I think it would be helpful for the community to kind of get a background and to understand kind of like where you're coming from and how long you've been involved in the scene. Like maybe, we've had a lot of different people here who have technical backgrounds, business backgrounds, but if you can kind of just speak at a really high level, like how you entered the scene, and then people can kind of see your what angle you're coming from.
Hi, and thanks for having me on this sit down. And so how did I enter the scene? I mean, basically through flying sims. I would say the general kind of Top Gun generation story. Without really becoming an aviator, I made different decisions in my life, although planes always kind of, enthralled me and excited me. I first started out in the, I would say, art sector in general, but in particular literature and translating literature. I translated Slovene literature into German. Studied literature, slavistics at the university in Vienna, among some other things, and did some books like that, translated books, and then went on and studied acting. And in the course of the acting studying, I also started to direct a little bit, and then took on directing at several, I would call that off theater projects in Vienna. Had a summer theater on my own with two friends for one season, which we then kind of ended due to lack of city funds, unfortunately. But all these kind of artistic experiences and writing experience, directing experience, acting experience, and so on, is absolutely something I do bring into Heatblur. For example, when directing and writing in parts the voice recordings for the Jester AI, stuff like that, doing our missions, campaigns, these kind of things. But I also work as a community manager, as lead Q&A, a little bit do everything here in between and kind of flesh out the things and fill in the gaps, and not doing any kind of programming. And how I got to Heatblur is simply that I was very active in DCS, in the multiplayer and the PvP and competitive scene from the very get-go in the 104th, and have built that squadron together with Maverick and Polka and Manowar and others. And at some point, I found out that Cobra was going to the air power in Austria, and I was going too. And I just shot him a message on the forums and was like, hey, do you want to hook up? And he was like, yeah, sure, let's do. And sent me his number. And so we phoned each other up, and we sat down for a chat at the air power. And we just kept chatting the whole day and kind of, started our friendship there. And then we also started working together, as in I started working for Heatblur and doing all the sorts of stuff that I just mentioned without wanting to bore people any further with my person.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's, if you think about it, it's really a story of passion and interest, right? Like, the schooling in literature and getting involved in, some creative works, and then, but being interested in this and getting involved with the community and just like organically meeting someone who's like on the module side. So that's, it's, I want to say, when you compare it to other careers, when you think about, I don't know, the or like just regular office jobs in corporate environments. It's, you go to school and you apply and then you work your way up, or you switch jobs or whatever. But it's interesting that it started with the passion. You kind of just organically grew into that. So that's interesting. And I think that's an interesting segue for my next question, which is passion versus saleability for modules. Now, from a player perspective, players don't really know about what modules are coming until they're announced, and it's like a heads up that Christmas is coming soon. Hey, we're a module maker and we're making this. Here's a really cool trailer, and it'll be out around this time. But before that happens, a lot of work goes on the upfront, the documentation, the actual building of the module. And I think what I would like to know is, from a Heatblur perspective, or just a module maker perspective in general, how do you go about selecting the modules? Because I'm sure there's the documentation requirement needed, but like, is there a way that you guys quantify, like, we think this will sell really well and people will really like this? Like, how do you guys go about quantifying it or thinking about that?
Look, you are a business and you need to think like a business if you want to survive as a business, of course, So anybody who wouldn't admit that you're trying to make financially sound decisions alongside the passion that you try to bring into the projects, in my opinion, would be a little bit disingenuous, if that makes sense. You have to think about that, because you need to hire people who have a certain skill set, and who, of course, need to be able to live well as well, and have the things that people need in life in order to make creative and good things happen. It's kind of like, especially when you come from the art sector like me, where you live in such a precarious situation, I would say that this precariosity, or how you say, does affect, how people generally perform, or how they kind of also perceive themselves in terms of either experiencing success or not, So it's great that, especially in software development and something like the gaming industry at large, I would say, where you can cross things like art, creativity, inspiration, passion, these kind of things, with your most favorite topics and so on and so forth, like aviation for us, also with a much more sound business model for the artists, the developers, the creators, the module makers at large, the game creators at large, that you can provide a much better founded, economical, sound business model, so that you can facilitate a creative process, and also, of course, take care of your people, because I think that's very important from a social aspect as well, of course, right? So to get that out of the way, of course, you have to think about, is it in any way possible that we can do that? And by that, it does not mean, can we get rich on it? It really means, can we do it? Can we generate enough to survive as a business long term? And so you try to, of course, kind of get modules that you think that would be popular with the community as well. But at the same time, I think what we try to do as well is to, or I guess maybe we're just lucky in that sense, that we can pick modules that are popular with a large part of the community at least, and at the same time something we're extremely passionate about, like the Tomcat or the Viggen, or these planes that have such a unique character, I would say, and I think there's a lot out there. I guess it fits every aircraft that you say it has such a unique character, because it has, even a Cessna 172 has something going for it. It's at least that it's a plane and can fly, but much more specifically also all its intricacies, and when you know how to operate it and what it can do for you and where it excels and where it doesn't excel so well, and to learn about these things as well, right? So, in general, you get that kind of with every aircraft, but then you have these aircraft that kind of, in my opinion, I would say, stand out a little bit, which are historically, performance-wise, also just by pure looks and the general appeal that they have, a little bit, I wouldn't say above the others, but maybe standing like a step in front of them or something in terms of noticeability. So if you get that kind of like 3 points that you can tick off, that A, it's a reasonable business decision, B, we're super passionate and love that aircraft, and C, it has a certain amount of glamour about it, then you're really lucky, I think. And I guess, in a way, selecting aircraft like that, to me, seems like a reasonable approach. The reality, of course, is that, a lot of other things figure into it. Like we could say, for example, it would be really awesome to do aircraft FX, whatever, X, Y, Z, doesn't matter the name, but developer so and so is already doing it, or somebody else called dips on it, or it already exists. Like, is there really a reason to make another aircraft? And especially in DCS, it is not the same environment, like I would say in the civilian flight sims, where several developers will attempt to make the same aircraft or variants of a certain aircraft. The 737, I think, is a great example. With all the different developers and great, approaches at simulating the aircraft throughout different sims, but also within the same sim. So it's not really a thing in DCS that you would make like 5 different versions of an F-14. You're kind of content with the fact that you make one of these and then you need to find something else. And so you get a little bit limited in that sense, because you have to think what works for DCS as well. What is appealing in terms of gameplay as well, in terms of weaponry, in terms of the mission it had. How does it fit in with the other stuff? DCS can be a little bit stretched over the periods of time, but then you see, something like Cold War that you guys are doing so nicely is thriving very much because people do like a consistency in time and period, and the arms that stood against each other and so on and so forth. So you have to be kind of a bit more limited in that selection. You can't just go in DCS and say, for example, let's do a 727. You could. It's a nice aircraft. I absolutely adore the 727. But you'd have to have some kind of another reason why you would particularly do that for DCS in a way. And how does it fit? Does it really add a lot of gameplay? Does it add much to the sim? Is it a good idea or not? And no, we're not doing the 727, just as an example.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now, I mean, I don't want to say this. I'm trying to say this in a nice way, but there are some oddities in DCS, and we don't need to go into this too much, but it's just like what I'm hearing is that we have to be passionate about it. We think that the players want it, and that like a documentation actually exists that we can actually build it. And then on top of that, we have to navigate the DCS universe that's made up by different module makers, because other module makers may already have rights on things, and they may already have things that exist. So is there like within the whole DCS ecosystem, from the early 40s to to the mid 2000s, like where are patches that we can help fill in and flesh out things to be more to feel more complete? I think, to me, what I'm thinking about is the oddity in DCS is probably like the I-16. It doesn't really have a counterpart, right? But now that it's there, if they wanted to make an aircraft around there, like they could start building around it. So it's almost like trying to decide. It's like trying to build a puzzle, and or the way I'm thinking about it based on my reaction from what you're saying. But it sounds like you're trying to build a puzzle, and you have like the 4 edges, and you're trying to work your way in the middle, and you're trying to decide like where's the best place to make the new piece and where to put it, right?
Well, it really depends. Like, say, if you go with the F4, why not go with the C, which is so much more kind of the Vietnam's F4, right, from that era. And the F4E that we're doing is late Vietnam War, and then actually what follows. But it kind of fits more in the middle. And then it's also like what things are available, for example, an internal cannon, or, certain targeting pods, weaponry, these kind of things, right? So you kind of want to give, I think, when you're in somewhere in the 3rd to 4th gen fighter era, you want to make it a little bit, I would guess, that it fits somewhere in between everything a little bit if possible. Like it's also the I-16. You could say like it has nothing to pit against, and one would have to add historically, right? I mean, because you can pit it against the 109K, you can pit it against whatever you actually want, against the Tomcat if you like, I mean, that not too many people enjoy that kind of shenanigan, more sandbox kind of like, I don't know, battle simulator or kind of this approach. That's totally clear, I mean, people, especially in flight simming and something that is so much tailored towards realism, they enjoy historical accuracy. But I think there's also a leeway, I mean, it comes a bit down to imagination as well. Could you place the MiG-21 BIS that we have in Vietnam? Historically, not really. But would I really fall out of my chair and lose all immersion and stop playing DCS for a second if I encountered it in a Vietnam-themed mission? No, I think I would go along with it. You know what I mean? So it also depends a little bit how you use the stuff as the mission creator. And that's good as a developer to really leave to the mission creators, because you really pick an aircraft, and you should go, I want to do this aircraft well, and I want to pick what makes most sense for that aircraft type, right? And then you kind of leave it to the open wild world, to do with it what they please. I mean, it's good to have a plan for it and to come with content that goes along with it, so you have something to fill. That's why we did the Forestal for the F-14, why we're still working on the A6 AI and later also module. These kind of things, try to deliver a lot of missions, campaigns, that kind of stuff, right? And you can make a module live a fairly long time for itself. So, and in the end, also the question is, how much should you really limit yourself in your choice by thinking too much about where does it fit? When in DCS right now you still have that possibility, I think, to fill gaps in all the eras since the 1940s. Arguably one could even go World War I. Not saying DCS should go World War I. I'm just saying the possibility technically would be there. And I think in the long-term picture, in the big picture, whatever gets added that kind of adds an experience that is a nice and a good and well-founded experience in DCS is a plus on my side.
Yeah, makes sense. So I was actually planning on asking this a little bit later, but I'm just going to ask it now. And because you mentioned it a little bit, but so I've noticed a trend, and it seems like, let me think about this. Yeah, it seems like to me there's starting to be a new trend where there's multi-variant modules coming out now. The Mirage F1 just came out recently, and there's multi-variants planned for it. The F-14 already has 2 in the game. And I was curious to hear about your thoughts on about, kind of from a business perspective, what does it look like trying to approach a multivariant project versus a single one? And then my next question after that is, I mean, players love the multivariant projects, right? Because it gives them more. And relative to the price, the multivariant projects are a really good deal relative to the single variant modules, which is interesting. So I'm gonna ask the question, which is like, I don't want to say what's the point, but because clearly players love it, and I personally enjoy it too. But kind of what's the reasoning behind it? Like why go the extra mile? I'm just kind of curious.
I think for us it's primarily about passion, but also about kind of, you have to think, what kind of history of an aircraft are you telling, and are you telling a more or less correct history and just a part of it, or a different aspect of it or something like that? Because it very much depends what kind of variants we're talking about. I mean, say if we did an F-14 module and there was only an A or a B, it would not be an F-14 experience, because the F-14 kind of, and arguably yes, for the D that could be said as well, but the D in comparison was really small numbers to the much more, you know, the stable of the F-14 fleet was the A, and then lesser extent the B and at least the D. But when you want to say F-14, you kind of always mean A and B at the same time. At least I do, you know. So doing both is just kind of a no-brainer, because you want to make this F-14 experience wholesome, right? And if you would do just the B, then everybody would be wondering, what's the A like? And yeah, I mean, you could do the A now as a completely different module. But then it also begs the question, you know, how much is the difference and what would it be worth? And if you have something like a jump between the A and the B, I would say, you know, I mean, it's difficult to really put a price on. I mean, like, maybe not that. It's probably not that difficult to put a price on it. But the question is, you know, like, how much more do you gain by doing that versus, you know, making others actually wonder, is the difference really worth it, right? With something like the F-14D, it's pretty obvious, because it has a different flight control system, PTID, you know, the MFD stuff, the different Hart. It's really, you have to do a lot of things completely from scratch. And so it's warranted to say, like, hey guys, you know, I mean, this is really too much to put in one package, right? You have different aircraft where the variants are just very small in difference in detail. So it's not that huge of a step anymore from going from one model to the variant sub-based model, kind of, you know, specifically if not much changes in the 3D model or these kind of things, you know, if the systems are more or less the same. And so you really give players a much broader experience, a much more holistic experience of the aircraft, and sometimes also a comparison that is revealing character, like in the A and the B, you know. I mean, it makes a difference if you fly the TF-30s or the F-110s. And so it teaches you something about the aircraft as well. Plus, it's just how the aircraft was, you know. And then we try to add even on top, you know, by campaigns, missions, forestal AI units. And of course, these things make things take longer, but the nature of DCS is a constantly evolving nature anyway. That means you need to keep adding in some form or the other, in my opinion, to keep it alive, you know, and to make it grow also. It's a growing experience. So having projects that are set to grow over a certain period of time, in my opinion, is not unfit for DCS. To the contrary, you know, I think it's a good thing that even someone who bought the Tomcat on day one, has more things to do, to switch, can diversify his Tomcat experience within the pack already, but also knows that in the future things will get added in some sort of way, you know. And of course, you know, you cannot make major additions to every module for the rest of your life, but you can still make it worthwhile to come back and have another go at it and find something new and get new excitement from it, and so on and so forth. So it's a very long-winded answer to basically say, you know, A, because it fits historically. Sometimes it's quite within an agreeable amount of extra resources to do it. And most importantly, it makes the player happy, and that makes us happy as well. And so, yeah, why not do it if you can? And then try to also be a little bit generous on that front to really let the players know, you know, I mean, we're doing this so that you guys can have an awesome experience.
What I'm hearing is, what I'm hearing a lot of is this constant tone to complete the experience. So Heatblur thought the A and the B were both necessary to really complete the F-14, to complete the F-14 experience. And it was able, you know, you guys were able to do it. You scoped it out and said, like, okay, this is possible. Now, that obviously builds a lot of goodwill within the community. And I think it's fair to say that Heatblur is one of the favorite module makers within the community. Because I mean, I see it all the time on Reddit. People really love Heatblur. So this is kind of a weird question, and I don't know if you can answer this, but I would actually be really interested to hear about the F-14's impact on the Viggen. And what I mean by that is the Viggen came out, and it's kind of a niche plane, and the F-14 is a wildly popular plane, right? And just widespread media and culture. So I would be, my question is really like, when the F-14 came out, did you see a lot of people then trying the F-14, really liking it, being impressed with Heatblur, or what you guys thought was they were being impressed by Heatblur, and then going down and checking out the Viggen?
That's very hard to answer because I'd have to speculate, I mean, I think the F-14 was very positive for the Viggen, but also vice versa. The Viggen was kind of Heatblur's first project. I came on by the end of it and by the beginning of the F-14 project, kind of. So, I was not there during the development process of the Viggen. But in a way, it was for Heatblur as a new company after the split of Leatherneck into Magna and Heatblur, as you might remember, after the MiG-21. A way to prove itself to the community that there's a developer that on his own can do a good module, a fun module, and I mean the Viggen is niche, but for a niche aircraft, it's doing quite okay. I mean it's and it's growing in popularity, I would say. And I think doing the F-14, of course, helped for that as well. Because the interest in Heatblur grew, and then you try the F-14 and you think like, that's awesome, so I want to see what everything else. I mean, like, sorry, I'm not self-praising us, but just supposing somebody said he likes it, then he would probably be more inclined to try the Viggen, to put it a bit more modestly.
No, it makes sense, and I see it all the time. Like, I spend a unhealthy amount of time, reading YouTube comments and going on Reddit and reading, but I see it all the time. Like, there's I don't want to name names, but there are perceptions in the community that certain module makers have their individual strengths and weaknesses, or their angle that they take on certain things, and players start to believe that, and then they decide based on that. So that was kind of the origin of my question, because I would imagine that the goodwill or the experience that you're providing buys goodwill, and the goodwill translates into not just like DCS customers, but like Heatblur customers. So that's kind of what I was thinking about. So it's interesting to hear your reaction to that. Now, you mentioned a note about the F-14 having a potential impact on the Viggen. What I would be curious to hear is to get more specific about multiplayer. I would be interested to hear about a module maker's perspective on multiplayer, because in past interviews that I've done, some of the module makers have been very honest in saying that we weren't really thinking about multiplayer when we released this. We just released it for all the players, or they thought that it may not have a home in a certain server. So I would be kind of curious to hear about your thoughts about the multiplayer scene in DCS and how it sort of evolved over time, and kind of Heatblur's perspective on multiplayer, and like, is it in the equation at all when you guys are trying to make decisions for modules or future steps?
So how much of the multiplayer involvement history do you want me to get into? Because it can be a very long story or a very rather short one, but that's up to you.
Let's say like some distinct moment in times where you feel like a shift happened, right? Because I mean, the players I've played for a long time can rattle off all the servers that have happened, but I think it would be very interesting for players who have recently come to kind of know, what was it like then, and then kind of what changed, and then how did how did the vibe just basically change, or basically the buffet of options kind of change over time? Because, you know, like when you think about multiplayer, like what are the major dots on the timeline where you're like, oh yeah, that was a thing, but then this happened, and now the flavor changed? Like, just kind of what stands out in your mind when you think about it really quickly?
You know, I mean, multiplayer in DCS has come a long way, and there's two things you need to understand about multiplayer. One, it's always at the forefront. It's the thing that's visible, that a lot of people talk about, where a lot of video making is coming from, or jousting and these kind of things, you know, I mean, like where people measure themselves, and also try to, you know, make tutorials or fly together, make events, so on and so forth. And that, of course, is a very visible tip of the entire iceberg, right? From DCS, the single player guys, they're much more among or with themselves, you know. I mean, a single player, there's certainly single player guys who make content, but most of the content creators touch, lean, or come from multiplayer in some way or another, I would say, carefully. I mean, I can be wrong, and if there's some big single player creator out there, or somebody who's preferably only doing single player but also has, you know, big I would say media output in terms of DCS online, then my apologies, you know. But the thing is still, you know, the huge player base of DCS, the large majority is single player. So, you know, that's just how the, you know, divide is kind of in between the player base that you're dealing with. The one thing, of course, that is very important as a developer is to not make the mistake to think that multiplayer is a marginal aspect of DCS, because ideally, as a developer, in my opinion, and this is not a comment on what any other developer said, everybody has a different approach, but from our opinion, you would think of it having a 50-50 split importance, right? I mean, you have the single player experience and the multiplayer experience, and they should both be equally well. And the multiplayer in DCS, and before that Flaming Cliffs, and before that Lock On, you know, is not something that came overnight. It's a community that has grown for well over a good 2 decades now, and I've been with it 2 decades. I think over 15 years or 17, or I don't know, I can't remember. The first major shift in this was going from hyper lobby to no hyper lobby. Not many will remember, but in the beginning in Lock On, you had a hyper lobby. People would chat in the hyper lobby. Oh, what server are you going on? I'm going on the 104th, or I'm going on this server, the 51st, or whatever servers were around back then. You know, and decided to fly there together. And you could meet up with people randomly and just say, like, hey, you guys gonna fly there? Yeah, cool, let's go fly there, which was actually a great thing. And that went away when Flaming Cliffs came out. And so the Squadron, Lone Wolf, in-game chat kind of nature all, you know, changed a little bit around that. Forums came more into being, you know, people started communicating through that. And then, of course, the onset of social media also started shifting this kind of, you know, pre-server relaxed chat to more outsourced infrastructures. Back in the day, also a lot of squadrons would have their own forums. So a lot of this kind of information that was spread online early on was spread a lot through the multiplayer community, through squadrons who had both the manpower and the funding through donations and resources, infrastructure, and the knowledge with people who knew how to make a homepage and stuff like that. So that you had, besides the D forum, also these kind of things before even Discord came along, which is, you know, I would say still a very recent thing. TeamSpeak was very big at that time. And also here, you know, the squadron stood out as the TeamSpeak host. So the places where the community could gather to fly together, that was squadron hosted, you know. And the two major servers back in the day were, or three major servers, No, it's actually more than 3. I mean, there were always way more servers, but I would say like where most of the PvP took place, right? I mean, you had stuff. You had an aerobatic server, then you had some national servers. You had the Russian Air Force server, which was way back in Lock-On always pretty full, and then in Flaming Cliffs it shifted a little bit from there, and then it was kind of like 104, 51st, and the 4C server, these kind of things, and the squadrons that were frequenting these servers, okay, they made kind of the bulk of that multiplayer community. And I was part of that, you know. I mean, me and friends of mine and people, some will still remember, some might not remember, some still know today. I mean, most of them are still active and around. You know, we try to build that multiplayer scene by, first of all, kind of offering a continued, stable server experience that was actually quite mainstream, so that it would accommodate a big, you know, portion of people. Because back in the days, the really concerning thing was to get numbers. DCS was still fairly small. The community was rather small in comparison to today, and so it was really the main thought and approach about how you made the server missions, how you made the rules, how you made the whole kind of setup and the atmosphere you wanted to create, and so on and so forth. It was really about, you know, getting people on the server and having them stay and come back, you know, and establish kind of like this main community that you can meet there a lot, you know, and you have people you can fly against and with, and so on and so forth. So these were the early days, you know, and then DCS came with the A10C, and that split the community a little bit, because you had DCS A10C plus Black Shark servers, and then you had the Flaming Cliffs stuff that would be separate, where you had Flaming Cliffs and Black Shark, but no A10C. And so you had the PvP kind of air-to-air guys flying the Flaming Cliffs plus Black Shark version, and then in between you would go and take flights with the A10 because it was cool. It was the first clickable, you know, modern kind of aircraft that we would get to experience in that way. So it rippled the community a little bit at that point, you know. And then when Flaming Cliffs 3 came back out, and you know, they were merged back together, the community kind of started re-evolving or reinventing itself from that point on a little bit again. Although most of those who were driving the online community, those who hosted the servers, those who curated the missions, those who organized the events, you know, who hosted the TeamSpeak servers, and then started making the first Discords and Facebook groups and what all came along, you know, I mean, they were still around. They were still the kind of driving force behind all of that. And then, you know, the rest is history, how DCS evolved. The F-18 came out, other modules, World War II, and it started evolving from there, and it has kept growing over the last years, you know. So it's very much a community and a history we come from ourselves, you know. Most of the core guys or the older guys at Heatblur, they've been flying in these kind of sims from IL2 to DCS to Flaming Cliffs to you know, FSX and X-Plane and what all you can imagine, you know. So for us, it's very important to contribute to that as well, because when we fly, we really prefer flying with other people rather than AI. But we want to create kind of a great experience for both, you know. So it's very, very important for us to honor that kind of history we have in flying sims in multiplayer and enjoying them ourselves by trying to approach modules so that from the get-go they're tailored for that. And the F-14 is, you know, a prime example for that, because you have to think about multi-crew, and it's actually tailored for multi-crew much more than for Jester being the main attraction of it, you know, in terms of multi-crew, because the real experience for the F-14 that brings joy and that makes a huge impact on your simming life, kind of, yeah, a change in experience, I would say, is if you manage to be a really good pilot Rio team, right? At the same time, we just have to accept, you know, it's not feasible for many people because the working dads and whatnot and don't have time or have a lot of work, can only invest that much, don't feel secure enough to go online. Not insinuating that they're insecure people, but it takes a certain step decision, and if you don't have the right things, mostly time for you available, it's sometimes hard to go over that hurdle and say like, yeah, I'm gonna start multiplayer now. I know how intimidating it felt for me the first time I joined online, so I guess not much has changed there. And so you really, in my opinion, want to think of both sides and try to think about to create it in a way that it really works well, both in multiplayer and in single player.
Yeah. While you were talking, I found myself really thinking about my career in multiplayer, and I remember, I think my first experience playing multiplayer online in a flight sim was Combat Flight Simulator. It might have been Combat Flight Simulator number 2, and they had that. It was kind of like Hyper Lobby. It was like what was it called? Like MSN Zone. I don't know if you played Combat Flight Simulator 2, but that was kind of like a major hurdle. You would have to go find lobbies to go join, and you had the whole pre-lobby join phase. And then, the lobbies were built into the game itself, and things started to get better with other games. We had MMOs where everyone could play. And I remember that, like, with the forums. So, you have your certain hurdles, like, an expansion pack might come out. Like, I think that happened in IL-2. Like, expansion packs would come out. It's like, oh, I can't play on that server. Like, I don't have that expansion pack yet. Or in DCS, like the World War II servers, like, they have that issue where, like, there's a World War II assets pack and you can't join. But despite the barriers all throughout history, from like all the way back to Combat Flight Simulator to today, people want to play with each other. And it's I don't know, it's something bigger, like, I guess, the human experience, but people want to experience the same thing with other people. And I think that's also, I loved how you ended your answer about the F-14, because flying the F-14 with someone else and someone who really knows how to Rio is such a unique experience in DCS, and actually a unique experience across a lot of other flight sims too. Like, you don't really, like, when you fly a Stuka in IL-2 and you have a tail gunner, that guy he's not doing much, right? He's just sitting back there. But when you're flying an F-14 with a human Rio, it's like you really are a team, and it gets great when you fly with someone over and over again. You really get into a rhythm. It's like, it just totally, I mean, Jester's great and everything, but like, it's just a whole other experience that is, I'm trying to think, like, I don't think there's anything else that really comes close, like, in terms of, like, even like outside of DCS, like, just any other flight sim. It's never really been repeated before. So yeah, I don't know, it's interesting.
It's definitely a unique experience, because you are, I mean, like, in a sim, it's very easy to play the hero pilot, right? And we all kind of lean towards that, the Maverick character in a way, or Iceman at least, right? And that's fine, I mean, that's the boy in us wanting to win and to succeed and all that stuff. But getting a Rio who can be your boss, I mean, so you really concentrate fully on just flying well, not about being the guy with the big stick and shooting everybody down and whatnot, but really being the guy who flies extremely well, while the Rio is doing all the talk on, the leading, the intercept, the calling out vectors, the even pressing the launch button, like, when I have a Rio, it's them who fire the missile, not me. I will just point the nose where they want me to point it and really try to be kind of the best pilot to facilitate them to do what they want to do with that mission and the bandit and the aircraft and all those things, so, and that's a very unique experience. I mean, it's one of a kind, it's unfortunately, I think for a lot of people, a little bit tough to find a Rio or pilot, vice versa, to establish that and it has a little bit to do with the nature of our hobby, and I think where it's kind of settled in the age curve of the customer or the audience in general. Those games where a lot of friends play together usually have or I would guess, have a big chunk of younger players who are still in school, who, go online after school, stuff like that, and who have that time to, just be 4 or 5 guys who've been raving about game X coming out and, wow, yeah, let's go, let's play it, Whereas the flight simmer, and especially now with more full fidelity aircraft and the amount of time it takes to learn it, and also the money you need to kind of get on a, I would say, very base level. And it's not a lot of money, but it's a lot of money for a school kid for sure. And it can be a lot of money for early students or students in general as well, depending, on the background and where they live and whatnot, and so on and so forth. So, your great capabilities of fitting out your home studio cockpit and peripherals and VR and the latest graphics card and so on and so forth, really comes with the age of work, which is the big, I would say, curse for gamers. When you have the time, you don't have the money. When you have the money, you don't have the time. So I think this kind of like me and my best friend are both loving the F-14 and becoming a Rio is a rather rare occasion. And it's great to see when that's the case. But I think a lot of people struggle a little bit because of that. And my suggestion is, to just go out there and fly with different people, because there's somebody out there you can click with. I'm sure of it, Might be even an entire squadron, which is also a great experience. And people overestimate sometimes how much time squadrons demand, and then you have different squadrons for different suits. So I always advise people, go and seek out, like, first of all, fly online, just fly online, meet people, learn how to survive online at the least, to get your ways around, and then look for a squadron. And in the squadron, you will find people who you click with, who like to do what you do, especially when you have squadrons that are F-14 tailored or around Navy stuff, at least. I mean, the chances of getting a Rio there, or pilot if you're a dedicated Rio, or learning to be both proficiently, pilot or Rio, are much higher than if you lone wolf around there and just kind of go like, yeah, it's so hard to find a Rio, which no doubt it is. But if you go looking for them, I think at some point you'll find them.
Internet's a big place. You can always find someone. So I do agree with you. Squadrons are kind of the best place. It's actually really where I learned, and it's even easier than ever before. Even with just like, well, it's ironic. Well, because I used to think, well, it's ironic because I have a YouTube channel now. So this might sound really self-serving, but I actually do mean this genuinely, that it's never been easier before to learn, right? There's guides on every little aspect of the game, so it's definitely attainable. I actually want to shift questions a little bit. So we talked a lot about multiplayer in general, and to get specific, I would love to get your perspective and your experience in terms of like recent events. Let's start with multiplayer. So, we launched a server in November, and I actually came from IL-2 Great Battles. I played a little DCS before, but not too much. And I think it would be interesting for the viewers to hear kind of like when you first heard of the server, and kind of like your experience with it, and kind of like what was like kind of your general reaction as a player, and also your reaction as a module maker.
The Cold War server specifically, yeah?
Yeah, our Cold War server.
Yeah. So I think we noticed it pretty much right away when it came out. And I think also if I remember correctly, it didn't take long to get a certain amount of numbers on it, right? It wasn't there like a 0 or 2 player server for a while, at least not from what I remember, and correct me if I'm wrong, because you will remember that much better. But it's definitely a server that I think was noticeable early on. Unless I'm missing the part where it wasn't noticeable, which but
No, so we were full within, I want to say, the first hour. Like we had a lot of like build up to it, and had a pretty big.
Yeah. That's how I remember it too. And so immediately, I think it was Jedi went online, and flew the Viggen there, and a couple of others as well over time. Always keep going back to the Cold War server from the team, and it's just been liked from the get-go. The idea is great. I think it's a great server. I think it's great when servers fill niche aspects now that the community is big enough. Before you were lucky if you could get one server full, and now there's so many great servers. Talking about shifts in the online community, a big shift was, and I forgot to mention that before, was when Blue Flag and Dynamic DCS and these kind of servers started coming up as well, and kind of took the reins from the War of Warfare a little, I have to admit, which is fine, we always kind of appreciated and applauded that, as a matter of fact, because it just showed the community kept growing and was, now is able to support more servers. And so to have servers that tailor to different aspects and needs and through the Inferno and 4YA and so many great servers out there that cover different things in the World War II servers. Burning Skies was the one back in the day, and then whatnot all happened along the lines. To see that the community can sustain that now from someone who tried to, and you will know what goes into that yourself, building the multiplayer community and building servers is just amazing to see. And it's even more amazing to see that these kind of servers like Cold War get so much traction with the community and are also sustainable and a continued effort, because if something pops up for a while and then disappears again, then it's just like a whiff in the wind. It comes and goes by, and it can leave value, but often it dissipates, whereas having something that's stable and around. And I know what goes into that on my side as well. It's a lot of effort and a lot of going through periods of time where like, why am I still doing this? But it's so much, it's so worth, because it shows that the community finds its home in these kind of places. And the Cold War server, in my opinion, is just one of the prime examples for that. It's a very unique server with a very unique theme. That is a major theme in DCS that just fits a lot of those modules that are out there that covers so much, of an era. And it's just an era that's also very interesting, in my opinion, in BVR, as well as air to ground, as well as, dogfighting, all kind of aspects, So I think everybody on the team is really hugely appreciative of the Cold War server.
Okay, thanks for sharing that. I would be curious, and I don't know if this is a weird question to ask, because I don't mean it in a self-serving way, but I'm more... I'm trying to wonder about the impact of multiplayer from a module maker perspective, because I've wondered a lot to myself, and I don't know if you've seen, but we do a lot of we do a lot of stats and polling on our server. And we asked a question, and it was like, have you bought a module because of the server? And I always wondered to myself, like, was there, like, when the server popped initially and it just kept going, I always wondered to myself, like, was there like a little blip in like Viggen sales, like just like all of a sudden, and it's like, oh, like that, like I wonder if it's because of the server, or like not even just our server, but like even other servers, like if that like ever happened, like can the multiplayer community, like, because I've heard that we represent 10% of the player base, so I do wonder if like if blips ever happen because of a server, like on module sales. Does my question make sense?
It does, and I'll be honest with you, we never looked for it or connected it with it, which in hindsight is actually a pity, because it's a very good question, and I'm sure it did make a difference, because, like I said, the multiplayer community is at the forefront of the storytelling and content creation in DCS, and the Cold War server continuously plays a role in that. So, it'd be nuts to assume that it's not the case. I mean, like all these servers, and you can see it's the same with the naval server. So when supercarrier drops and the servers put it on, I mean, that's like, if you didn't have the servers to put it on or to try it out, the aerobatics server, for example, does a great job in just offering this first fly around experience with any new module, for example, and so on and so forth, where you don't have to worry about getting shut down and all these kind of things, right? I mean, they all help with that. For me, it's a community effort to bring modules further. I mean, like, we're niche, so mouth propaganda is also important. A lot of people go to the buddy who already owns the module and it's like, hey, is it cool? Can I fly it on Rhine somewhere? Does it have a lot of missions? How are the campaigns? Is it cool to fly? Do I need a lot of, I don't know, do I need a new joystick for it? Whatever comes to mind on different flocks of players, from newest to, long-term player, they will all kind of at least glimpse at things like the Cold War server and take some kind of direction from these, I would say, points of infrastructure, points of interest on the online map of DCS, right? And the Cold War server certainly fits that bill. So while unfortunately we never looked and compared, I think it's safe to say that, yeah, it sure must have made an impact, especially on the Viggen, where people experience flying against the Viggen might think like it might be cool to try it, always want to know how it is to have it in a dogfight and so on and so forth. So it's still a small percentage of the overall DCS player base, but at the same time, I think that also the single player community gets influenced through what the multiplayer community does, at least to a certain extent. I wouldn't put the pin and say it's right here, but a stretch of it certainly is also influenced by what people say, how they experience a module in multiplayer, and also tell about their experiences and stories and so on and so forth from multiplayer.
So we did a lot of polling on our server, and we do, when I say polling, like polling and stats, our database, I can tell you from our server, from April to about a week ago, we've had like 8,000 unique players on the server and about 8 years worth of playtime between all those players on the server. So people are really playing a lot. And it's interesting because we track all the stats and we can see like the weapon hit percentages and how players are using it. And we can get really into details about like how we want to balance the server and shift things around. So with that context, and I'm not really asking about the Viggen or F-14, but just in general, but do you think there's ever the possibility where a module maker may be willing to add a historical missile to a plane because there's more viability in its use? Let's say like an old Sparrow or an older Sidewinder version, due to like servers being popular?
I think why not? The question is, does it make sense in terms of the module in general? Does it make sense in terms of resources and time invested versus outcome you get from it? There's some, let's say, these stories like from Cura Epstein or some where it says like they called missiles bidons because they would just fall off the aircraft and do nothing. And then you could say like it would be nice to have such a missile from a historical aspect, but then you have to ask yourself as a developer, apart from doing it the first time and the great idea behind it, how much benefit does it really bring to the player? So these decisions still matter, right? I mean, where it then comes from, the proposal, and I don't want to talk down the impact that a server can have, because I mean, like, you certainly listen up if a proposal comes from a server request. But I would say, for me, it would be important that the proposal is reasonable more than that the server is popular, because, it would be unfair, like, if some super unpopular server came with a really great idea and you tell them, like, no, we're not taking it because you're not popular enough. You know what I mean? that such ideas come from popular servers more likely, because you have a bigger exchange of ideas, minds, opinions, influx of players, and thus thoughts, I mean, of course, is clear, yeah, but it really is about the idea in the end, and that's a little bit that thing with the multiplayer community, where as a developer you have to kind of act twofold towards them, like, and I'm saying them and I mean us, because I still, and all of us still consider ourselves part of that multiplayer community. You really have to think about them when you develop stuff, but there's some things where you must not think about them, because you still want to have that kind of realistic recreation simulation of an aircraft, and that can tip the balance of the multiplayer experience within a certain setting, either this or that way, but that must not matter to you. You know what I mean? It does not matter to us if the Phoenix is great or shit online, pardon my English. It matters to us that we make it close to what it was as an experience when you employed that weapon. It happens to be so that the Phoenix was a great weapon, I mean, and it had its flaws. And the funny thing is, it's a learning process, and we learn together with the community. That's the great thing about something like a community of enthusiasts, because even the guy who knows a half-truth and might throw it in your direction might kick off or start off a process that makes you research something better even, or more, or again, because initially you wanted to refute the guy, but you discover something like, I'd say that's just an example. You don't research to refute people. That's not what I mean. But, it just tips you off on a third path of things that you never even thought about. And suddenly you discover, okay, I mean, that didn't work just as advertised, but this actually worked way better. And, so it's this great kind of journey of re-experiencing and researching these aircraft and learning more and more as we go. And so anybody who has a proposal that pushes us further in that direction is hugely welcome, and certainly the multiplayer community is a place where a lot of that comes from, especially because people talk with each other, test with each other, these kind of things, right? At the same time, they also sometimes have wishes and kind of things they care about, which you then have to disregard a little bit, and so on and so forth. So it's really about the idea more than about who proposes it, I would say.
Yeah, no, I think that's a perfect answer, because it introduces bias, right? And what's really, I think this really rings true, and it's on trend for all your previous answers. It's like, what is the experience that we're really trying to give to the players, and trying to make sure that there's integrity with it, right? Because just because a server is small doesn't mean they have bad ideas. But it also, on the flip side, is big servers don't have the best ideas either, right? Like, everyone's looking at things from their very narrow point of view. So it's very encouraging to hear from a module maker perspective, you're trying to think about things on the whole. I kind of want to transition basically just to kind of hand the mic over to you, because I feel like we've gone through a lot, and a little bit longer than I expected, actually. But I do want to offer, if you have any kind of closing thoughts on, now that we've talked this through, is there anything that's kind of sticking into your mind where you just want to say anything to close?
I wish others would have been with me, because they would have had so much beautiful things to say about all of that as well, and also different things. But first of all, keep doing what you're doing, and as for self-interest, self-promotion, don't hold back. You deserve it. Really, I know what it takes to offer a server over years, decade even, and to have it up 24/7 in all that time, and have it be reliable, and have it be fun, and have it be good, and try to keep people behave civil with each other, and so it's really a huge effort. And I think all of us as a community should be grateful to guys like you who do these kind of things. And the Cold War aspect, I think, is such an important aspect in DCS. So it really fits the bill, and I'm just very impressed, about all those shining beacons in the community, which are the squadrons, the servers, the server owners, the mission creators, the content creators, but also all the people who just go out there and fly with each other, and all the single player guys too. I mean, it's this big, huge kind of melting pot of so many different interesting people that offer so much, to each other, and that's really, I think, the most rewarding part about this experience. That you can say and go as a developer. We're part of a community. We're not just a business that's selling to customers. I mean, like it's a often used term, and it might be a little bit cheesy, but in the end, I see simming like a big family, right? I mean, sure, some are extremely distant relatives in between, but in the end, I still think it's this community that is really what makes the experience so nice in the end. No matter what module you do, what kind of server you fly on, it's really a flock of people that are always nice and great to see and to meet, and to make modules that make them happy. That's what it's all about. So I really wish that the Cold War server continues on a very successful road, and that we keep making modules that fit that bill, and see them flying on your server, and see people have fun with it, I mean, and break them and push them to their limits, and help us make them better by being on our toes and reporting all the bugs. And it's a great dynamic, to cut a long story short, and I hope that dynamic continues and continues successfully for everybody.
All right, I really appreciate it. Thank you for the kind words. There's like 12 plus people who work on the server, so my stupid name may be on the server, but I'm totally reliant on all the help. I can't code anything. The developers are still to this day, I still think they're magicians. I don't know how they get anything to work. So I appreciate it. And I think that this conversation was interesting because I'm just going to go back to what I said earlier. It's about the human experience, and it's really just to have everyone have fun together. And it's a common interest between all these players. And despite all the different barriers that popped up over time, like hyper lobby, the fragmentation of the community for whatever reason, server shifting and everything, and different eras of DCS being modeled, like, people want to have fun together. And especially coming off these weird couple of years with quarantine and COVID and all that, like, it's still very heartening to hear that people still to this day still really want to play with each other. And it makes me happy to hear that a module maker is really taking a very human perspective on things. So I wish you guys good luck and good fortune on your future module releases, and I really want to thank you for your time.
Thank you, buddy.
Yeah.